So for this first problem, we want to solve the equation below by squaring both sides of the equation so that we can find that extraneous solution. So let's start with just rewriting. So the square root of z squared plus 2z minus 3 is equal to z minus 3. And to solve any square root equation, you want to get rid of the square root by squaring. So we will square each side of this equation. And on the left-hand side, the square root and the square will cancel so that you get z squared plus 2z minus 3. And on the right-hand side, you'll have to multiply this out. So that will be z minus 3 multiplied by z minus 3, which distributing z to each of these, you get z squared minus 3z. And distributing minus 3, you get minus 3z and plus 9. Now we can rewrite everything. So on the left-hand side, we have that z squared plus 2z minus 3 would be equal to this right-hand side, which is z squared minus 6z if we combine these, plus 9. Now notice that you have z squared on each side. So we can just subtract from both sides this z squared. And so you get 2z minus 3 is equal to minus 6z plus 9. And now it's just a linear equation. We can add 6z to each side, so you get 8z, and add 3 to each side, so that you get 12. And so z, dividing each side by 8, would be 12/8, which simplifies to 3/2. Now, with any square root equation, you really need to plug it back in and double check that it actually makes sense. So at this point, let's check our work. So let me make some room. And if you don't do this, you're going to end up with these extraneous solutions that don't make sense. Because if we plug in this 3/2, you'll see that you get something that is nonsensical. So plugging it in, we get that z squared, so that's 3/2 squared plus 2 times 3/2 minus 3. All this will be equal to z minus 3, so we have 3/2 minus 3. Now on the right-hand side, 3/2, which is really just 1.5 minus 3 would give you negative 1.5 or minus 3/2. And you might already see a problem here. We have the square root of something which has to be equal to a positive number. But let's simplify this left-hand side. Notice that when we multiply this 2 by 3/2, the 2's cancel, and you get 3 minus 3. So these two terms here, they're going to cancel each other out. And so we just get 3/2 squared. And squaring a fraction, you just square the top and the bottom. So 3 squared is 9, and 2 squared is 4. And then likewise, taking the square root of a fraction, you take the square root of the top and the square root of the bottom. And so you get 3/2 here, and we're saying this is equal to minus 3/2 on the right. But as you can see, that doesn't make sense. And so this z value we got is an extraneous solution. In fact, there is no solution to this equation. And really, what we found is the solution to the equation when there's a negative sign. Let me use a darker color. When there would be a negative sign on the left-hand side. If we started with this equation, when we square it, we would still get all of the same work and we would still get the same answer, but in that case it would make sense because now you would have a negative sign here, here, and here, and it would make sense. So you have to consider that when solving these square root equations that sometimes you find the answer for when the square root term is negative, even though you didn't actually have that to start with. So the only way to guarantee that you're doing these correctly is you need to plug in your solution value back into the original equation. In fact, you should be doing this anyways because it's just a good habit, especially if you need to know for sure if the equation that you solved is correct, if you do find that correct value for the variable. If you're not checking, even if you practice for years, you're still going to make mistakes. And so checking will catch your mistake before someone else does. And in the next video, we're going to look at 3 more examples to these exercises on the Khan Academy.